Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Teresa Fuller. She's a pediatrician, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Imagining a Pandemic as a Physician Novelist. Teresa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm glad to be here.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Sure. So I can say I had a pretty traditional route to medicine. Always wanted to be a physician. And so just went straight through school, I'm a bit of a science nerd, so I did an MD, PhD at Howard University. And then I did a PEDS residency at University of Maryland. And since finishing residency, I've done a couple of different things in medicine. I did acute care at first. I was really interested in PEDS emergency and PEDS hospital care, so I worked as a hospitalist. I did academic medicine for a little while, and now I'm working as, during that time I did some training in integrative medicine, and now I'm working as a primary care pediatrician in an office and enjoying the preventive care. But all along that time, loved reading, always loved reading. And so what I did, I tended to love medical thrillers. So did a lot of reading of Robin Cook and Michael Crichton, Tess Gerritsen. And I loved reading their stories, but they're all MDs. And at some point, as I was reading those stories, I thought I really would like to write a medical thriller. So I got into writing. And at one point, I remember reading a novel and thinking, I'm not going to read another novel until I write one. And I think that's what kind of primed my mind to start thinking about what kind of medical novel I would write.
So how difficult was it to write your first novel? And take me a little bit behind the writing process that you used.
It was much more difficult than I thought, because at first I had the idea. Once I got the idea, I thought it wouldn't be too hard, just sit down and write. But it was a lot of starting and stopping. Of course, part of it was I was working full time the whole time. So trying to figure out how to fit in the writing time. I did a lot of it during my commute. But what I did was I did a lot of reading about the writing process, just learning about how novels are constructed. I did those types of things and kind of learned as I went. And it's been an interesting journey. I'm still learning how to write, but it took me over a year to complete the novel, but I just kept chugging along and got through it.
Excellent. So let's transition into your Kevin MD article, Imagining a Pandemic as a Physician Novelist. A lot of people say that the COVID-19 era that we're going through, it really fits into a movie or a novel. Now, for those who haven't read your article, can you walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
When coronavirus hit and, back in February when it was just kind of starting to become something we were thinking about, at first, we didn't know what was coming, but then as it started to unfold and we were seeing just how serious it was, and we were seeing patients dying, we were seeing hospitals being overrun, all of those things. What happened was I started thinking back to the novel I had written, and I actually went back and reread it because I wanted to kind of see, wow, how well did I anticipate this kind of stuff? And so that's what made me write the article. I just thought it was interesting to compare what an actual pandemic was to what I imagined it would be like. And basically, the way I structured the article was what I got right and what I got wrong. So some things that I anticipated a pandemic would be like and that I wrote about were things like the hospitals being overrun. Yes, that there would be full to capacity, that we would have to have satellite clinics, that we would have to even bring in people that weren't weren't traditional doctors or nurses to help out. So those types of things I anticipated. I expected also the shortage of PPE, shortage of medical supplies. I expected school closings, travel restrictions, and even the political rancor, because you always have that. So I expected that politicians would argue about how to implement some of these changes. So those types of things I addressed in the novel, but there were some things that were so surprising to me. And that was the second part of the article, what I got wrong. So, for example, I didn't foresee the citizens, the people of the U.S. reacting to this in a political way.
Hmm.
I had assumed that if we had such a danger facing us, that we would kind of band together and work towards what we could do. And of course, we see some of that. But I was surprised at how we, as citizens, divided along political lines. I thought also that just the perception of danger, out of self-preservation, we would view politicians who tried to downplay it with suspicion. But I was surprised to see that there was such a strong group going in that direction, as opposed to, the other side saying, yes, we need to wear a mask, we need to protect ourselves, we need to protect each other. So that was one of the things that I didn't anticipate. And I also didn't anticipate it lasting so long.
Hmm.
I had thought that it would be a wave, a few months of really being bad. Then we get used to it. Then we figure it out, and then we are able to get through it. But now that we're more than 6 months into this, I am finding how surprising that is. And that we're still really in the midst, not even having made the kind of progress I would have expected. I also got wrong that how, on a more personal level, that people would be dying alone in hospitals.
Hmm.
I did not anticipate that. I didn't anticipate that people would not be able to see their family and that they would be dying alone, and how stressful that would be on not only the families, but also on the physicians and nurses and all the healthcare providers. So that's basically what the article looks at.
Now, every good novel has a protagonist. Now, in our real life COVID-19 story, who would be your protagonist?
I would say it's the healthcare workers, the doctors, nurses, MAs, all the ones on the front line are certainly the protagonists.
So we are in the midst of the story. We don't know how it's going to end. So what do you anticipate the next few months to bring?
I think we're going to continue having this kind of rancor. This isn't really going away, but I do anticipate that we are, and I see it already happening. We're seeing better treatments. We're seeing that the scientific community is really banded together and worked on this. So I anticipate we're going to see improvement in outcomes.
Hmm?
Of course, when the vaccine is available, that we're going to see also improvement in just the course of the disease, not so severe. Hopefully, a really sharp decrease in the cases. So I anticipate that's going to happen, but I still think it's a little ways further away than I would hope.
We're talking to Teresa Fuller. She is a pediatrician and a novelist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Imagining a Pandemic as a Physician Novelist. Teresa, I talked to a lot of physicians on the show, and a lot of them love to write. Now, you're one of the few who've actually published a novel. What would you say is your number one tip for those physicians who are interested in taking that next step and perhaps write a novel themselves?
Definitely learning about the publishing process, because one thing that this book, even though I wrote it in 2007, I didn't publish it back then because at the time I was trying to navigate the publishing process. And so the traditional route is writing a query letter and you send it out to literary agents. And that process is very demanding. And basically, I lost steam trying to do that. because, I was practicing full
Hmm.
time. So I would tell what I ended up doing when this pandemic hit, that's when I went back to it and I actually published it. But the way I did it was through self publishing. So I would tell a physician to just be aware of the different options, that you don't have to go that traditional route if you don't have the time or energy to look for your publisher and all of that. But there is the self-publishing route, and you make it as good as you can. You get a good editor to make sure it's in good shape, and then you can self-publish it and do your marketing yourself.
And my final question, Teresa, what is your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
I think the take-home message is, of course, a lot of physicians are dealing with burnout. So I think it's important that we find that passion and go ahead and pursue it, because in the midst of how hard we work, we tend to get really bogged down with that and we put our other passions to the side. And I
Hmm.
think that's a mistake. So find that time, if it's writing or if it's something else, to do it and to go for it, because that really it helps me with burnout. I think it would really reduce the stress because you have something that keeps you excited.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight and time, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Kevin.